Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Launderville. Um, this is a three-part podcast on how to write a proposal. Broke it up into three parts just so you don't go crazy trying to listen to too long a thing all at once. It's a lot of information. Of course, you want to look at the proposal guidelines that I posted on under proposal stuff on Brightspace, and also the proposal rubric. Okay. So, part one, how do I write a research proposal? You're going to start with the introduction, and the introduction is going to include a lot of references to primary literature. So, we try to emphasize primary literature in class. We're going to discuss primary literature papers in the lecture part of the class, but you're going to really read a lot more of it preparing for this proposal. And when you are reading a scientific literature article, you don't have to read it cover to cover for the purpose of writing a proposal. It depends on what part you are writing. So the first aspect would be skimming titles and abstracts to find out, is this article what I need or not? And then you're going to skim for what you need. So when you are writing an introduction, reading a lot of introductions is helpful. And when you're working on the methods, focus on the methods. And in the end of an introduction, usually the authors will give you the bottom line. Here's what we found out. Sometimes they save that for the discussion, but more commonly the practice is recently that like the last two sentences of an introduction is the bottom line of the paper. This is what we found out. So that's one way you can get through more literature. When I say primary literature, I mean that this is the first report of new information out there. So there's all kinds of scientific literature. Primary literature is the one where it has an introduction, materials and methods, results, discussion. Maybe not in those order, but that's the idea. Secondary literature would be like a review. So a review would be something where some prominent author in the field is summarizing recent results from a lot of different papers. And that can be really helpful when you're learning a topic, but it won't have any materials and methods in it, and it won't have results in it. Typically, they're just talking about, here are the issues in this field. So and so lab says this, so and so lab says that. And again, useful, but that's not primary literature. And as much as possible, I want you to stick to the primary literature. Tertiary literature would be something like your textbook. Okay? So when you're reading these things, and you'll get more practice on this in lecture, if you're in lecture, you want to see that you're reading it critically. So you're looking at issues of like, is their sample size decent? Did they use statistics correctly? When I look at the graph, do they label what the error bars are? You might not agree with their interpretation of the data. You might want to look at who paid for the data. This has been a problem in research, for example, on the harmful effects of smoking. A lot of that research is paid for by tobacco companies, and miraculously they don't find it to be as harmful as independent scientists. So you want to think about that. In the discussion part of the paper, which you're going to get more into to try to figure out what does it mean when you get some results, this is the part where the authors are trying to make sense of their data in light of what's already been done. So how do our results fit into what has already been done? And they can speculate. So we think it means this. And they don't necessarily have to have a lot of data to back that up. Sometimes people will put stuff like that in a discussion just to put their stamp on it, like they are the first person to have this idea. Now, you can't just say anything you want. You can't say that, aliens caused this gene to be mutated in this system, but it's not just a list of facts like in the results. The results are just this is what happened, and that's it. Not what does it mean. Discussion is more about what it means. You're going to run into vocabulary issues. If you don't know what a word means, just look it up. You're going to get stuck, and then you'll get better at it as you pursue. And then you can always ask us, me, or your TAs if you're stuck on part of the primary literature. So you want to use the literature as a model for how to write how to write an introduction, how to write methods. Those are the things that you're going to focus mostly on for this proposal. Of course, you never want to plagiarize. You've heard about that in lab. You should know what the primary versus secondary literature is and stay with the primary. We just discussed that. You can't use a website. You can't use Wikipedia. You can't use textbooks. And you can't use an encyclopedia if you even know what that is. That was something big when I was a kid. So none of those are acceptable for citations. And you want to stay with the primary literature mostly. Okay? When you get to the methods, that'll be on the next podcast, you're going to see that a lot of methods sections are really badly written. And when you are trying to figure out exactly what they did, that's when you find out all the stuff that they left out. Okay? And you'll also find out when you read a lot of this literature that because it's published doesn't mean it's any good. Sometimes there's wild mistakes and just poorly written stuff that is published. Again, because it's published doesn't mean it's good. You shouldn't cite something unless you read it. So when you cite it in your paper, you're saying, this is what I think it means, and I got this information from here. Not that someone else got this information from here, and I wanted to say the same thing, so I cited what they cited. Okay, you read it, you cite it. Okay, you decide what it means. There's some links on my homepage if you don't know where to find scientific literature. So let's go there. Okay, this is my homepage. If you just Google my name, you'll come to this page. It's a blog page. And then under links here, there's a bunch of links. So PubMed is what I use the most for finding articles when I need to find articles. There's PubMed and PubMed Central. PubMed Central, everything on there is free access. PubMed, most of the stuff on there is free access. And if you search while you're on campus, you'll have a lot more access to articles than if you're off campus. If you're off campus, it'll often tell you don't have access to this. Now you can fix that by setting up a VPN connection. And if you search on the UAkron page, how to set up a VPN connection, I also sent out an email about this earlier in the semester. Then being off campus is no different than being on campus. Okay, we have subscription to a lot of journals, electronic, and those are in here. So even if you can't get the paper directly, you can sometimes find it by going to the eJournal site and then finding that citation. You can also request through interlibrary loan and your student ID for a paper that we don't have access to. And what they'll do is they'll send you a PDF of that paper right to your email. So you have to fill out a form and use your ID and sign up for interlibrary loan, but the link is right there. And it usually takes 2 to 3 days. So again, if you're doing this the night before, that's not going to work. But you shouldn't be doing it the night before. You should be starting now. And if there's a paper you need, you can get it through interlibrary loan. And then finally, Web of Science is one that a lot of students don't know about, but it can be really helpful. And that is, let's say you find a brilliant author like this guy, and you want to know what else have they done, or a particular paper that you find is really helpful, but it's old, and you want to find out what has been done since then. Okay, So you can go to Web of Science, and this is one of the ones where we have a subscription at the University of Akron, so you got to do this while you're on campus or through a VPN. And if you search, it'll give you a list of all that author's papers. This goes on, and then how many times a particular paper has been cited. So if you say, I like this paper, but this is a review, and so I want to find primary literature that's related to this paper. If you go over here, it'll list how many times it's been cited since it was published by somebody else. And you click on that. It gives you a list of all the papers that are citing that paper. So if you find a paper or an author that is really helpful and you want to find more, this is one way to do it. You can say, these are the people that are citing that paper, and that's one way to expand your citations. Okay, so in your introduction, you should be answering this question. What is the question you're going to address, and why do we care? We being me. Why does the funding agency, me, care about this problem? So you're going to convince the reviewer, me, that whatever you want to do is a significant problem and it's a doable problem. Significant in that it's going to add to our knowledge about cell physiology, and it's practical. It can be done given the constraints of this class. Okay, so you want to be thinking about making like a legal argument, like you're standing in front of a jury and you're trying to convince them that your client is innocent, and you're going to present in logical order. First you know A, then if you know A, you got to know B, and if you know A and B, then C is obvious, and therefore not guilty. So you got to remember that I'm reading lots of these things. I'm trying to go through them quickly. The more logical and straight forward you can be, the better it is for you. If I have to figure out what you're talking about, that's not going to go well for you. Okay? So you're going to talk about what has been done before. You're going to be logical. If A, then B. You're not going to be wasting time of the reader. So you're going to talk about being compact with your language, saying things as succinctly as possible, and you're going to not be boring in that your sentences aren't just a list of facts, but they actually are interesting and they pull the reader along. Okay? We'll talk more about these details in subsequent podcasts. And then the last sentence of the introduction will be, we will test the hypothesis that, this is future tense, this is going to happen in the future, this spring. So the idea is you're leading all the way up. Here's why this is a cool problem. Here's what's been done before. Here's the part that hasn't been done. Here's why if we do this, it'll save the world. And then we will test the hypothesis of that. That's the end of your introduction. Not as a separate section. Sorry, auto update. Not interested in auto update. Okay, so not as a separate section, just the end of your paragraph for your introduction. Okay, and not labeled as here's my hypothesis. Okay, just the end of your introduction starts with we will test the hypothesis that, and then you go forward with that. Okay, so the next podcast will be on methods. If I can get this to